the upload before the speech, which is always the best guarantee. And second, to be, in a certain way, the embodiment of the transatlantic relation, because I was not here last year, but I see you're back, and this is the good news. Nevertheless, and I will try to address your point of self-assertion of the European, and I wanted to come today in front of you with a message of hope and determination. Where some see threats, I see our fortitude. Where some see doubts, I want to see opportunity. Because I believe that Europe is inherently strong and can be made even stronger yet. And this is now. That a stronger Europe will be a better friend for its allies, especially for the United States, and that everybody is asking us to be stronger, except our adversaries, of course, sometimes also, less understandably, ourselves. And this is what we need to remedy as well. And this is why I really believe, and I want to start with this remark, we need a much more positive mindset. And in support of it, I would like to start by offering a brief clarification. There has been a tendency these days in this place and beyond to overlook Europe and sometimes to criticize it outright. Caricatures have been made. Europe has been vilified as an aging, slow, fragmented construct sidelined by history, as an over-regulated, listless economy that shuns innovation, as a society prey to barbaric migration that would corrupt its precious traditions. And most curiously yet, in some quarters, as a repressive continent where free speech, or I would say where speech would not be free, and alternative facts could not claim the same right of place as truth itself. That old-fashioned and cumbersome concept. I want to offer a wholly different view. Europe is a radically original political construction of free sovereign states who conjured together centuries of rivalry and war to institutionalize peace through economic interdependence. And don't believe once again, this is an old-fashioned construction. This is what we need. This is what we have to advocate. And I see so many friends from the Western Balkans and Moldova here. They want to join the European Union. Why? Because they know the value of this approach. And we are too shy not to say we are in a certain way starting not to believe in ourselves, which is a huge mistake. Everyone should take their cue from us instead of criticizing us or trying to divide us. When President Putin came here 20 years ago to make the case for spheres of influence for his country, he was actually arguing for spheres of coercion at the expense of Europe. He was, in effect, advocating for the resumption of a doctrine repudiated even before the breakup of the USSR. We all said no. And it is the same resounding no that we are opposing to the reckless assault against Ukraine. But that line of thought, where your neighbors are considered as captive satellites, and they should be forced back when they stray away from orbit, has not disappeared. Quite the contrary, it seems to gain new traction. And to all those who are thus inclined, I would say, look at Europe. Obviously the European Union, but as well all these close friends of Europe, Western Balkans, Norway, UK, Canada. Look at what we can achieve with a partnership of equals. Look at that incredible space for the free movement of goods and people, a space of freedom, a space of peace and prosperity. Look at the life expectancy, health, equality and freedom indicators. And we still believe in science in Europe, even when we speak about health and these type of things. And I really believe it's much better. Look at our climate and competitiveness policies. Look at the number of EU Nobel Prizes and Fields medals. Look at how the European cohesion policies ensured economic convergence and how citizens, their liberties, their press, schools, universities, and academic freedoms are protected. It is a space, not a coercion, but of cooperation. We should be proud of our European achievement and know our strengths. Obviously, we have to fix a lot of things. We were all together yesterday in a retreat to speak about our competitiveness. And we know the homework we have to deliver. But let's speak about our homework behind closed doors and let's deliver. But let's provide a positive image of ourselves and let's be proud of ourselves, because this is what our fellow citizens need. And this is, I really believe, the reality of this continent. We should be proud of our European achievements, indeed. And we Europeans are proud to play down ourselves and to endure that others would do so too. We shouldn't, period. This doesn't mean that we are not challenged, but let's face this challenge and let's fix them. But I wanted to start with this clarification. And I will not speak, perhaps you will have questions about Middle East. I will not speak about Iran, even if all of us, we are in total support with civil societies after what happened. But I want to focus precisely on our existential challenge, Ukraine. Ukraine today, Ukraine tomorrow, Ukraine the day after, and security in Europe. Ukraine is obviously the first challenge we have. And on this challenge, we delivered. We delivered. With a total assistance of 170 billion euro package, making Europe by far the main donor, and today almost the only source of military funding. We imposed 20 sanction package on Russia and entirely rearranged our economic model to reduce dependency on Russia. And very rapidly. Nobody thought in February 22 we would be able to do so. We did it. I fully support President Trump's drive towards a negotiated peace, one that should be just, lasting and robust. And I want to believe that we're getting closer. But as discussions are taking shape, Russia keeps pounding civilians and destroying energy facilities with the obvious aim of freezing Ukrainians into submission. The answer cannot be to cave into Russia's demands, but to increase pressure on Russia instead. And let us look at the broader picture. If you take this past 4 years, Russia, after invading Ukraine, is a weakened country. It squandered inordinate amounts of money on a senseless war and has now entered recession. It is isolated economically. It is completely dependent on China. While the country already had a severe demographic problem, it lost hundreds of thousands of young lives to an illusion. It meant to fight NATO expansion. Sweden and Finland joined NATO. It meant to weaken Europe. Europe is massively rearming. This is a strategic, an economic, and even a military failure. And when I hear some defeating speech about Ukraine, when I hear some leaders urging Ukraine to accept they are defeated, overpricing Russia in this war, this is a huge strategic mistake because this is not a reality. One day Russians will have to reckon with the enormity of the crime committed in their name, with the futility of the pretexts, and the devastating longer-term effects on their country. But until that time comes, we will not lower the guard. We must ensure that the settlement protects Ukraine, preserves European security, disincentivizes Russia from attempting again, and also doesn't give the rest of the world a calamitous example to follow. So the Europeans have a direct stake. As main actors of the support to Ukraine, as members of the coalition of the willing, as fellow inhabitants of the same continent, and because of the European destiny of Ukraine. First, we have to make sure that Ukraine is in a position to continue to resist the aggression. Last December, European Council decided on the 90 billion euro loan to Ukraine for 26 and 27, two-thirds of which will be devoted to military equipment, with a clear Ukrainian and European preference. And France will do its part. And I want to thank the President of the Commission for the hard work in order to deliver this package, and it will be voted in the days to come. Our defense minister just visited Kiev, our deputy defense minister did the same, and we sent new equipment to Ukraine on top of what is done. I want to thank Germany for the great commitment and all the financing. Second, we should keep going after the Russian war economy. We are preparing a 20 sanction package in the EU, focusing on the energy and financial services sectors. And we should continue to hit harder the Russian shadow fleet. Russian oil revenue is down 25%. And 75% of sanctioned ships do not return to Russia. We should definitely step up and generalize this effort against the Russian shadow fleet because it's efficient and it's painful for the war economy in Russia. Third, we should intensify the work carried out with the coalition of the willing on security guarantees. Imagine 1 year ago, we were just looking at the US to try to clarify if they were ready to engage on Ukraine or pushing just for the end of the war without any condition. The big change during this year, this coalition of the willing, from the Canadians to the EU, Norway, Iceland, Western Balkans country, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, we finance 100%. When some US materials is delivered to Ukraine today through the coalition of the willing, it is financed by the coalition of the willing. So it's a first wake-up call and it worked. We organized ourselves to frame the support to Ukraine, and we did organize and finalize in January with a clear political mandate the security guarantees for the day after the peace in order to make this peace credible and sustainable. Our military staff are finalizing this work with now a clear backstop provided by the US and a monitoring process, but a clear commitment of all the Europeans and allies in these security guarantees. Fourth, the Europeans will have to agree to any possible deal because they will be an essential part of any security guarantees, any prosperity package, any sanctions relief, any decisions on the European future for Ukraine. No peace without the Europeans. I want to be very clear. You can negotiate without the Europeans if you prefer, but it will not bring a peace at the table. It is for the same reason that I have decided to establish a direct channel of communication with Russia in full transparency with Ukraine and our European partners and our American allies. We will be part of the solution and we should be part of the discussion. And we have our own European interests to defend in this, especially when it comes to the future of strategic stability on our continent. And this is for me the second challenge ahead of us. How will we, in the future, coexist in Europe with an unreconstructed, aggressive Russia on our borders? And we have to discuss this issue now. If we reach a settlement on Ukraine, we will still have to contend with an aggressive Russia, with a defensive industry on a sugar high and a bloated army. We will have to define rules of coexistence that limit the risk of escalation beyond current work on separation of forces after a future ceasefire. As Europeans, we will start with defining our own security interests. And this is part of such a peace deal. Should we accept the deployment of long-range missiles within distance of our borders? Should we accept Russian interference in our neighborhood? What does arms control look like in the age of drones? Will it be possible to define missile limitation arrangements in Europe, like the INF Treaty, while China has become a factor in arms control? And what about the nuclear domain, where New START, the last treaty still in force between the US and Russia, is now terminated? How will we rebuild our alliances in our immediate neighborhood when Russia is trying to maintain or increase its footprint in the Mediterranean Sea or in Africa, aligning with all the forces of destabilization? I'm clearly incomplete in this list, but all of these questions have to be carefully prepared by the Europeans, because we will we will have to be at the table of these discussions, and these discussions will occur, and we have to be prepared. And we all forgot that a few years ago, we just lived in an order where all these questions were partially fixed by very old treaties, negotiated without the Europeans, for the Europeans, betrayed without any consentment of the Europeans, and sometimes with the withdrawal of some allies without any coordination with the Europeans. And I still remember the end of the INF Treaty. I discovered it in the newspapers, as all the allies. We have to be the one to negotiate this new architecture of security for Europe the day after, because our geography will not change. We will live with Russia at the same place and the Europeans at the same place. And I don't want this negotiation to be organized by somebody else, as the Europeans. Even in periods of less confrontation, it took sometimes decades to craft any of these treaties that helped mitigate the dangers of the Cold War. But the Europeans must start this work with their own thinking and their own interests. So my proposal today is to launch a series of consultations on this important issue, which we have started to flesh out with our British and German colleagues, but in a broader European consultation with all the colleagues here, with a lot of capacities, a lot of strategic thinking. I see my Swedish colleague and a lot of European colleagues. We will address together these issues. We will coordinate, and we have to face it. This leads me to the third challenge. How do we build leverage to enter into such discussions in a position of strength? Europe is rearming, but we must now go beyond. Europe has to learn to become a geopolitical power. It was not part of our DNA. We conceived ourselves as a political construction to provide peace. We delivered. Second, a single market to provide growth and prosperity. We delivered. Now we have to reform it in this new order. In this new geopolitical environment, Europe has to become a geopolitical power. It's ongoing, but we have to accelerate and clearly to deliver all the components of a geopolitical power. In defense, in technology, and in the de-risking vis-à-vis all the big powers in order to be much more independent. But when I speak about Europe becoming a power, I don't speak about France or Germany becoming a power. I speak about Europe. So we have to think and act as Europeans, I would say by design. And this is what we have to do now. And if this time of rearmament is a time of dis-synergies, of separation, or national power, it would be a huge mistake. We have to think now, power at the European scale. We have to think about our defense, obviously, but we have to reduce our dependencies through policies of European preference. This must be the case for the entire value chain, from AI and cloud computing, critical minerals, space, clean tech, as well as defense industries and design of armament. Everywhere we have over-dependencies. We have to de-risk our model, and we have to endorse clearly a European preference. Targeted, perfectly designed, and I want to thank the Commission for this hard work, but this is a necessity. We will be credible only if we are able to procure and produce what we need, without foreign strings attached. We have achieved significant progress last year within the EU. We have agreed on a defense readiness roadmap to 2030 to fill our critical capability gaps with standardized and interoperable equipment in Europe. And in this spirit, I believe clearly we have to follow up. This is why it makes sense to make the future air combat system together with Germany and Spain. It does make sense to have concrete projects like air defense with SAMP/T new generation with Italy and UK. It does make sense to have early warning system like JEWELS, our initiative with Germany. And we have to accelerate the cooperation we organized sometimes 7, 8 years ago, and we have to build additional cooperation. And I want to warn everybody, you have a lot of money on the European market on defense and security. If this money is used just to have national solutions, or just to favor the national players without a clear European approach to build European standards, to make European simplification and to play Europeans and to help countries to deploy as well additional industrial footprints, we will waste our money, waste our time, and create a lot of dyssynergies. Huge mistake. So I'm an old-fashioned guy for these days, but I do believe in the FCAS, I do believe in jewels, and I do believe in SAMTE new generation, because it's hard for me to understand how we will build new common solution if we destroy the few one we had. Sorry.
Let's revive the positive image of ourselves. The words there of French President Emmanuel Macron addressing that session of the Munich Security Conference. He went on to say we need a much more positive mindset. He called Europe a continent of institutionalized peace and warned people not to think that this is an old-fashioned approach, but he did have a call for Europe to take more responsibility for its future, saying that we have to be the one to negotiate the security architecture of Europe. Well, we've got our diplomatic editor, James Bays, covering this security conference. He joins us from Munich. And James, I've got a bunch of questions to ask you. But first of all, was it just me, or did it seem like the first part of Emmanuel Macron's speech there, when he talked about the tendency to overlook Europe or criticize it or dismiss it as oppressive, where free speech is not tolerated? Was this a 1 year late debunking of J.D. Vance's speech last year?
Certainly, yes. There was a rebuttal to what J.D. Vance said a year ago about Europe culturally and the European values that exist from President Macron in this speech. I think you can see it following that. You can also, I think, see it from the speech that we heard earlier on today from the German Chancellor, Chancellor Merz. Made it quite clear that he thinks that the world is in a new era. He says the so-called, we talked about that earlier, Sammy, rules-based international order is over. Well, President Macron is saying in this new world, Europe has something to shout about. When we spoke a few minutes ago, Sammy, you said it's well, we discussed the fact that it might be hard for Europe with its cooperation and consensus model with 27 different countries in a world where might is right. He said, no, we are the modern construct. We are the way forward for the world. The other states are old-fashioned, so making a positive case. And he says it's a case that Europe's rather shy about making. He says in this new world, well, Europe needs to speak loudly about its model and become a force, a geopolitical force in the world, which I think he seems to agree is dividing into this different blocks, this multipolar world developing in more ways than it has even in the last couple of decades.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thanks so much to our diplomatic editor, James Bays.